Hey guys, we're past Halloween, but I wanted to put together a tier list over horror movies because I feel like regardless of the fact that we just passed the month of October, which is when horror is celebrated because of Halloween, I feel like horror movies are something that we indulge in year-round. And I feel like tier lists are just fun and they're simple, so I thought I might as well give a go at it and give a tier list here. And I just want to give a few disclaimers before I start here. That'll be really quickly. If you can't tell already, this video is unscripted, so I'm just kind of talking off the top of my head. So if I stutter or stammer, then that's kind of expected because of the fact that there's no script with this like there is usually in my videos. Also, this is my second take of this video because the first take was way too long, so I'm going to try to make this video more concise, and also, I feel like I'm losing my voice a little bit here, so, please just bear with me a little bit. And also, I haven't seen every horror movie, but I feel like this covers the majority of horror movies. I think we're at 58 movies or 60 movies on here. And I feel like this is the majority of American classics are covered in this. And then hopefully in the future, I feel like I do plan on doing a second version of this list, and I want to get a lot more foreign horror movies in, and then movies that I haven't seen, I'll add those as well. So just to start with, let's begin with Friday the 13th. So, this is probably going to upset some people, but I think Friday the 13th is a pretty bad movie. I'm going to give it a D tier. I think it's really bad, actually. It's kind of a Halloween clone, but the problem with it is that they get ridiculously close to killing the killer multiple times, and they just don't do it, and there's a lot of stupid choices in this movie. So, Friday the 13th is a very poor horror movie, and I think you should watch it still because there's some cool things to it. I think the first few shots are pretty cool, especially with the stalker angles they kind of take from Halloween. But I think there's some cool elements, but for the most part, it's just riddled with stupid choices, and it's very tropey. It's just teenagers in a camp that are being promiscuous and they have to get killed off, that kind of thing. Next up is Conjuring 2, but I'm actually gonna let's go over Conjuring 1 first. Let me see if I can find it. Conjuring 1. I actually really like Conjuring 1. I think it's a super entertaining movie, but the problem with it is I feel like it's kind of surface level. It's about family, it's about, superstition, realism, faith, whether you believe in the paranormal or not, but that's kind of surface level, and I'll elaborate a little bit more on that as we go here, but I think it's really solid. I think it's A tier. I feel like that lack of depth and thematic value to it is made up for by the fact that the movie is just so entertaining. Moving on to Conjuring 2, I feel like Conjuring 2 is similar to Conjuring 1, and I feel like most horror sequels are usually really bad, but I think Conjuring 2 is actually a very decent follow-up to Conjuring 1, and I think Conjuring 2, it's a really beautiful movie to look at, and you really get that vibe that, you're in that time period, and that you're in, I think it was London. So, Conjuring 2, in my opinion, is a B tier just because it's not as creative as Conjuring 1 with its shots and sequences, and I feel like the cat's kind of out of the bag, but it's still a very, very good follow-up in terms of, horror sequels and what kind of standard we have on those. Next, I'm going to talk about Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the original one from 1974. I think Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a very good film when you look at it from the lens of it was a budget filmmaker's movie. So when you look at this movie, you don't want to look at it as, this is a studio film that was, professionally made and had some big budget, because that's not the case at all. In fact, there was a huge controversy over Tobe Hooper, the director, not, paying his actors more after he got this big payday when the movie took off. But I think Texas Chainsaw Massacre, it's got some of the horror cliches, but this was also before the horror cliches really became prominent and well known. So this was still during the infancy of what I like to think is modern horror, and I think that it does a really good job of using certain angles to depict the horror without having to show all of it. And I feel like it seems like the movie would be a lot more grotesque than it is, but it's not. And I feel like that subtlety is something that I really like, and I think it's a really solid B tier. Definitely a really revolutionary film, and everyone should watch it. Next up, we have Insidious. Insidious, I think the first half of Insidious I really, really like, because I think it uses the jump scare. You could argue it's the best use of jump scares in any horror movie, period, honestly. It is such a good and effective use of jump scares, and also it shows you images, which it's not cheating you in any way. So it's not, it's not going to show you some object that when the character puts their glasses on, it reveals to not be a silhouette of a man, but it's just some object that was fooling them into thinking that it was a person or something, right? Like, you get what I'm saying. It doesn't give you any of those cheap jump scares. Everything in this movie is, the jump scares are real, and that's what the characters are actually seeing. I will say, though, this movie I think it's a good movie, but I think that it had a low budget at the time. It was, I think, $1.5 million, which is surprising because James Wan was coming off of Saw. But, I would say that the budget shows at times. I think the soundtrack is pretty decent, but the movie, it doesn't look as, refined or as, studio-like as some other movies. And, I'm not gonna lie to you and say the movie looks great, because you can definitely tell that it has a lower budget, but I still think it's a very solid movie. And I think if Insidious had the production quality of The Conjuring, then it would be ranked. It wouldn't be ranked much higher. I'm not really factoring it into the rank, but it would be held in a much higher regard in the public, I think, personally. I think it could be an A tier, but I think for me it's a high B tier. I think it's a really, really solid movie. I just think that, the lack of a budget kind of hindered the movie in the public eye. I'm not holding the lack of budget against the movie. I'll watch a movie even if it's low budget. I'll play a game even if it has shitty graphics. It doesn't really bother me. But I'm just saying. That's really all I have for Insidious. I think, again, if Insidious got the same level of love that The Conjuring did from a studio, then I think that it would be a lot more popular today, and it'd be held in a higher regard. But I still think it's a very good movie. Next up, we have Nosferatu. Now, Nosferatu, however you say it, I think it's Nosferatu. I watched the movie for my film class a while back, and I think that it's definitely a very revolutionary film. It's a silent film, so the thing about it is that you can't hear the characters talking. They display things through intertitles in the film to portray dialogue every now and then, and it's a very, obviously the film is dated, but you can definitely see a lot of this beginnings of the horror genre, and especially considering this is a German expressionist film, you can see there's a lot of unique ideas going on here. Like, you can see some attitudes that Germany had at that time, where they were, especially against the foreigners. I feel like Count Orlok in this movie, who's the vampire, kind of embodies this foreign element that Germany was really afraid of at the time. And then also, there's some other themes going on. You've got some really great use of motifs and objects, like windows are a big part in this movie, so are visions. And I think that Nosferatu is a very revolutionary film. Obviously, if you hold it up by modern standards, it's not as impressive, but considering that this was the spawning of everything and it had very decent effects for the time, I'm going to give it an S. I'm going to give it an S tier. Next up, we have Child's Play. Child's Play, I think, is a very... I don't like Child's Play, I'll be honest with you. I don't like this movie. I feel like out of all the 80s slashers, this was my least favorite, and it's not because I'm scared of it. I just think that I think the pacing is kind of off. I never really felt super invested in the movie. The plot really didn't keep me going, and the characters themselves felt pretty weak. It's just, it's a slasher with a doll, and I feel like it just relies way too hard on the fact that people are afraid of dolls. And that's really all that Child's Play has going for it, in my opinion. C is for Chucky. Next up, we've got Nightmare on Elm Street. This is the original 1984 version. I love this movie. I think it's a very good slasher, especially because it came after, you had a bunch of Halloween clones and a lot of other movies which were they were extremely similar, but then A Nightmare on Elm Street comes and it's very different and it's very unique. And I really like that about it, that it was original when it didn't have to be. And what I really like is the fact that we got Johnny Depp in this movie. And it's pretty cool, to see some of the 80s tropes. It feels like when you watch these movies, you kind of can get reminiscent for those time periods. Even if you weren't alive during those time periods like me, I wasn't born during the 80s. But it's definitely the film itself, it's got this campy feel to it. But I really like it, honestly. And I feel like that's kind of the charm of some of these slashers. The acting is pretty bad. I'm not going to lie. There's some actors who do a pretty bad job of acting. And, there's some questionable choices that happen, as is typical in slashers. But I actually really like A Nightmare on Elm Street. I feel like it's definitely on the better end of the tropes in terms of slashers. I don't feel like the choices are too stupid. The characters, you can kind of jive with them more than, let's just say, Friday the 13th. So for me, I'm going to give Nightmare on Elm Street a very good B tier. Next up, we have The Witch. The Witch I actually really like. I feel like it's a very good atmospheric horror. And I think it's a very good movie that's kind of underrated. And I feel like it goes under a lot of people's radars. Okay, guys, I did a cut because I just accidentally said a spoiler for The Witch, so I'm going to redo this because I don't want to have any spoilers. The Witch is a very, very good atmospheric horror, in my opinion. I think it's a very good movie that deals with trust issues within families. I think it's also very good at encapsulating the horror that happens when, you're looking out in a field or, if you're looking out at some farmland when you're on a road trip and you think to yourself, what if I was here in the middle of the night? I feel like it encapsulates all that horror and it puts into a very good film that does a great job of using its atmosphere, and I really, really like The Witch. It plays off a lot of those folk horror ideas and urban legends, and personally, I'm going to give The Witch an S. That might be a little bit surprising, but I think it's worth it. I think it deserves it just because, it uses its atmosphere so well. Next up, we've got Barbarian, which is a very, very unique movie. And I just watched this movie last week, and I love this movie. I think that if you look at it from a critical point of view, I feel like it is a little bit scatterbrained, and that's probably because of the fact that the director, who's also from The Whitest Kids You Know, I can't remember his name, but the director didn't really have an outline, so he was just writing whatever he wanted to have happen next, and you definitely see that in the movie. But the movie, that's kind of the charm of it, the fact that it's kind of all over the place. But it kind of also has like these different genres going at the same time. It's horror, but at the same time it's kind of got this satirical element of horror going on as well, and it's also got some comedy bits to it. And I thought it was actually a really funny movie, especially in certain points. And I really liked this movie, and there was actually a few points in this movie. There was one point specifically where when the movie cuts, it's towards the beginning, I thought that we went to a completely different movie, and I was so confused when I was watching this on my stream. I was watching this online and I thought to myself that, the recording wasn't right or something, but it was the same movie, and I feel like that kind of shows that it's a little bit scatterbrained, but I really, really like this movie. I feel like it's super unique in a time where horror movies are not unique at all, and I feel like it gives us some creativity when we really need it, because nowadays horror movies kind of seem to be very formulaic, and they're borrowing off the past horror movies a bit too much. Barbarian, you could very easily give an S. For me, I'm going to give it an A. The reason why I'm not ranking it higher is just because I feel like the thematic elements to it are not as fleshed out as some of these other films that I'm probably going to put in the S tier. But it's very solid. You could definitely argue for being an S. I feel like, it's got the elements of the patriarchy and whatnot, but I want a little bit more depth. But it's a fantastic movie, and I feel like everyone should watch it. Easily top 2 best horror movies of the year so far. You could put it number 1, and I would respect that. Next up, we got The Exorcist. Kind of a no-brainer. This is going to be S tier. Exorcist is widely regarded as one of the greatest films of all time, greatest horror film of all time, and it deserves that title because this film is it's a horror movie, but at the same time it's a movie that's about so much more than just horror. It's not just there to scare you, it scares you in a way with meaning, and it covers a variety of subjects like faith and it's what I really like is that it covers a lot of details, but it also a lot of themes, like you've got abuse, you've got faith, you've got family, but at the same time you've got this element of using off-screen moments to their full potential, and I think we see that when this is towards the beginning, so it's not really a spoiler. But the girl, I can't remember her name, but she gets possessed off screen. So you just see kind of a demon's face flash, and it's kind of a jump scare. And then you also see this statue of the Virgin Mary in the church defiled. And I feel like that's an excellent use of off-screen kind of moments happening. And I feel like this movie is really a masterpiece, and it deserves all the praise that it gets. So The Exorcist, very easy S tier. Next up, we've got Halloween, the first one. I really liked Halloween. Again, if you watch this movie now, you're probably going to think to yourself that it's very tropey, and it's got that kind of campy 80s feel that, that we tend to like. But I feel like this movie was there before a lot of the tropes were there, and John Carpenter is honestly a genius. I mean, the fact that he directed this and made the iconic soundtrack is just crazy to me. Halloween is very good. I think that, yeah, by a modern standard, it's not as impressive, but at the same time, this is the movie that kind of jump-started it all, and it really got us into this modern horror era that we're still in today. So I'm gonna go ahead and give Halloween an A. And I'm gonna give it an A, and I feel like, you know, this pioneered all the slashers that we saw for such a long time, and you know, slashers are still around today, but they're not as prominent as they used to be, but still, a very revolutionary film. Next up, we've got Hellraiser. This is the 22 one. I want to find the original one first. The original Hellraiser. So that's right here. I'm gonna give this. Hellraiser was a very good movie in my opinion. I think the first half of it, the first hour of it, was extremely good. I feel like the pacing, the tension, I really liked it, and I liked the story of it. And it's very gory, I'll admit that, and I'm not a fan of gore typically, especially if gore is the only way you scare people. But Hellraiser finds a way to not only have gore, but to have like a very tense atmosphere without even needing the gore necessarily. And I feel like Hellraiser is it's very good, and I feel like it's kind of overlooked when we look at, you know, most horror movies from this time. But at the same time, I think it's a very good movie. The only issues with it is I think the girl's name was Julia, and I remember the brother's name was Frank. I feel like their connection or their relationship is a bit underexplained, and this isn't a spoiler, but I just feel like it's a bit underexplained, and I feel like they could have elaborated a lot more on why it is that Julia, you know, connects with Frank the way that she does. Because it just feels like a case of Stockholm Syndrome, and it's very odd. And the next thing is, I feel like the ending of this movie feels like a cop-out in that, you know, it becomes all cliched, and it falls for all the tropes, and it just tries to scare you with, you know, meaningless kind of gore, whereas in the beginning it seems like there is a general point behind these beings, but I feel like the last half kind of contradicts that. So I think the last half was weaker when compared to the rest of the film, but I think the first hour was fantastic. I'm going to give Hellraiser a very solid B tier. Okay, the modern Hellraiser on Hulu. I just want to take a side step here for a second, and I just want to say from the bottom of my heart, fuck Hulu. I think Hulu is a complete and utter scam compared to Netflix. You know, their subscription plans are absurd. They try to charge you for as much as they can, and they're really penny pinching. But here's the reason why I'm pissed at Hulu. I was watching Hellraiser on Hulu's website. I got a free trial just for this movie, and what happened was I was watching it, and for the first hour it was fine, but the second hour I noticed visibly that the quality was either 720 or it was 480. It was noticeably worse quality. And I thought to myself, okay, maybe it's my internet. I checked, my internet wasn't the problem. Then I looked at the settings to get 1080p, and I couldn't get it either because it doesn't allow you to to set custom settings. So fuck Hulu. That was a complete and utter tangent. I'm sorry, but Hellraiser as a movie itself is actually very good. I was worried that this movie was gonna take way too much from the original Hellraiser and not do the right things that the original Hellraiser did right. But honestly, this is a very good reboot, and I like the fact that they changed the story up quite a bit, and they kept it from being predictable. I think Hellraiser 2022, so this year's Hellraiser, is a very solid movie, and it's going to surprise some of you guys, but I think it's on the lower end of A, just because it's a remake, and I feel like it's a very, very good remake, and compared to the original, and it's not very predictable, and I really like that. But I'd say that it's a very solid film. Next up, we have I Know What You Did Last Summer, which is a teen movie from the 90s, slasher. It's riddled with stupid choices, but it's 100% a guilty pleasure film. Like, you watch this movie because you want to relive, some of the 90s, and you want to, see some of those tropes again, and it's got, all these teen elements to it. It's kind of a campy movie, but it's got some charm to it, but it's not a very good movie. I mean, the choices are stupid, the characters are very typical horror archetypes, but I'm giving it a C tier. It's a guilty pleasure movie. Next up, we have Beast. I made a whole review over this, but basically, if you like Beast, you're an NPC. It's a D tier. Next up, we have Saw. I really, really like Saw. I do think that the movie... I think this is James Wan's best movie. But I think that Saw is a bit too... Like, it's over-stylized. And I feel like it kind of detracts from the movie when you constantly have these weird effects going on that, you know, obviously it's early 2000s movie. I think it was 2004 when it came out, so you're going to have stuff like that. But it's just, it feels off when you watch it nowadays, especially if you're a new watcher, if you're watching it for the first time. It feels kind of dated because they use so many damn effects when they're editing this movie that feel a little bit unnecessary and over the top. Also, there's a few questionable choices from the cops, and there's a few moments where it feels like they could have been more effective, which I'm not trying to give anything away, but they could have been more effective, and they were kind of clumsy. But Saw, I'm going to give an A tier. I think it's a very, very good movie. By the way, these are not in any specific order. It's just, you know, if it's on the lower end, I'll put it on the lower end. Otherwise, everything is just kind of, they can all be interchangeable. But, yeah, I think Saw is a very, very solid movie. Next up, we have Sinister. I really, really like Sinister. I think Sinister was a very, very solid movie. I think the first hour of Sinister is significantly better than the second hour. I think the first hour had a lot more of a subtle horror feel to it, whereas the second hour kind of, the movie forgets what it's going for, and it becomes this jump scare kind of typical horror movie, and I feel like that was the problem with it. But besides that, I think Sinister's first hour was amazing. I think the plot is good, even with, you know, them kind of copying out towards the end with jump scares. So I think it's a very solid movie. I'm going to give it an A tier. Next up, we have Halloween 2. I think Halloween 2 is actually very underrated. I think that for it was following up on Halloween 1, and people kind of got used to Halloween and slashers and these kinds of movies. So when Halloween 2 came out, it obviously wasn't as revolutionary as Halloween 1. But people complained a lot about the gore. But I think, okay, yeah, I agree that there is too much gore in this movie for, you know, what it was trying to go for, because Halloween 1 surprisingly doesn't have that much gore. But I think this movie uses the hospital setting really well. I really like that it pays homage to the original while also giving some new scenes that aren't just completely copying off the original. So we still have the stalker angles used in the original that are incorporated in this one, but it's in modern times with a different Michael. So that's just an example, which I think is really cool. And I think there's some really suspenseful moments in this. People are going to complain that all the characters in this probably feel like they're, you know, pieces of meat going around waiting to get slaughtered by the butcher, who is Michael Myers. But that's just a complaint against a slasher genre, because that's all slashers. All slashers feel like that. It's like everyone's just waiting to die except for, you know, one person. But I think Halloween 2 is very decent. I'm going to give it a B tier. Next up, we have The Black Phone. I think The Black Phone was a decent movie, but the issue with it was that it was just the ending. I feel like there were some choices, not just in the ending, but mostly towards the end. There were some choices that were very questionable, and they kind of dragged me out of the plot because I was very much so like I was kind of WTFing. I feel like The Black Phone is it's a good movie, and I feel like some people are really gonna like it because it's stylized for, you know, I think it's the 70s or the 80s. So some people are really gonna like this movie. I think it's a decent movie, but I think that it could have done. I feel like it could have ironed out some kinks in that writing department. So I'm gonna give this a B tier. Also, I think the director for Sinister and Black Phone are the same, and there's also the casting is very similar. But I think Sinister is just a better movie. It's a kind of a side note, but you know, I think Sinister is that director's better movie. I can't remember his name. I think it's something Flanagan. I can't remember his name, but very good director. But Sinister, I think, is his better work. Next up, we have The Thing. The Thing is a classic, and what I love about The Thing is that it's very creative, it's very original. It takes place in Antarctica, and it makes complete use of the setting. There's some movies that, you know, they'll be set in some place, but they don't utilize the setting to its full advantage. But The Thing utilizes, you know, Antarctica and the idea of, like, you know, this alien being in this base in Antarctica to its full potential, and I really, really like that. And the movie is very creative, and it's also, it's like kind of like the Among Us before Among Us, in that it's, you know, there's a lot of suspicion going around about, you know, who's infected and who's not, and I think it's a very, very good movie. The Thing for me is a very easy S tier, and Kurt Russell does a great job of portraying the typical 80s protagonist, but I love The Thing. You know, I think it's my favorite John Carpenter movie, and I think that it's a fantastic movie that's very original and creative. Next up, we have Psycho. I mean, I don't really think I have to explain this one. It's an easy S tier. Psycho is, you know, it's a psychological thriller. It's a pioneer. You can see so many elements of it in modern movies today, not just in horror. Hitchcock is a genius. Yada, yada, yada. You get the point. Next up is The Call. The Call I really, really liked, but I think, if you haven't seen The Call, by the way, it's a Korean movie on Netflix. I highly suggest watching it. I think it's a very good movie. But I think the problems with it are that there's a bits and pieces of plot armor here and there, they kind of make some sequences that should be, they make some sequences that should have ended in a certain result, not end in that result, and then the movie becomes a little bit far-fetched. And it's just, you know, I feel like the writing could have been a little bit better towards the end. But I think that the premise of this movie, the originality, I've this massive, you know, I give movies that are original a lot of leeway, and this is a very original movie. So I think The Call is a very good movie. I think that it could have been ironed out a little bit better. And I think had it done that, it could have been a very easy S tier, because I'm giving it an A. Just because the writing was questionable in certain areas. Next up, we have Silence of the Lambs. This should be a no-brainer. I'm giving Silence of the Lambs an S. For me, it's rank 1. Like, this is my favorite movie. Silence of the Lambs and Memories of Murder, if you don't know, are my two favorite movies of all time. Silence of the Lambs got me into movies. I think that's an amazing movie. It does a great job in writing. It's a gold standard for what any good movie should be. It's got great acting. It's won the big 5 Oscars. But the thing about this movie that makes it so good, and, you know, winning Oscars doesn't matter, but, you know, the thing about this movie that makes it so good is the fact that the writing is so good and the lines themselves just feel so natural. And also, there's a very hidden amount of depth to this movie. Silence of the Lambs comes off kind of as just, you know, it comes off as a very intricate and clever crime thriller. But when you look more into it, there's a lot of, you know, areas that are kind of hidden until you examine further, and you see a lot of more parallels and themes going on in this movie that you don't initially see. And I feel like that's really cool. And I love how you can kind of dissect this movie. I will say, though, side note, that I think Silence of the Lambs is not really a horror movie. I understand that people are going to say psychological thriller or psychological horror, but for me, Silence of the Lambs has always been more of a crime movie than a horror movie. And I feel like that's really honed in by the fact that this movie is very realistic compared to other horror movies. Silence of the Lambs is very good. Eventually in the future, I want to make maybe a detective movie or a crime thriller tier list where I'll go through like 7 and all those movies. But Silence of the Lambs for now, just because I know most people associate it with horror, it is probably my favorite horror movie of all time. If we're counting it as horror, it's S tier. It's my favorite movie of all time. I don't have a huge bias. It's my it's my rank 1. Next up, we have The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It. I feel like after Conjuring 2, you could see that, you know, the cat was out of the bag. There were some issues where it felt like they were kind of copying out to typical horror tropes, and, you know, it was kind of predictable. And then, you know, this movie came out, The Devil Made Me Do It, and it's just, it brought it to a whole new level of being predictable, and honestly, it's just a very forgettable movie. It feels kind of like an action movie more than a horror movie. It's not terrible. I think you'll have fun with it. I think if you enjoy the other Conjuring movies, you'll like it, but it's just not a very good film. Next up, we have Signs. I think Signs, this is my hot take, I think Signs is a criminally misunderstood film, and I love this movie. This was the first Shyamalan movie I saw, and I remember my older brother showed this movie to me when I was a kid, and I was completely terrified. This movie is honestly... The thing about Signs, and I'll try to make this as briefly as I can because I could go on for hours about this movie, is just that it links completely separate ideas together, which I really, really respect. So in this movie, it's about faith, but it pairs that with the extraterrestrial, and I really, really like that. It also does a great job, like The Witch, of using atmospheric horror in the sense that, you know, it uses the soundscape and whatnot, like you hear crickets dying down when, the aliens are coming closer in on the house. there is a lot of moments like this that you can find in Signs. I'm not going to give it away, but I think that Signs is a scary movie. I think it's a very good movie. The thing that people hate about this movie is the ending, but if you read more into the ending, and I've got a whole video doing an analysis of this, I think that you'll see that the ending, okay, I'll admit that it's not perfect, but you can justify it, and the rest of the movie is really, really good. So, with that said, I think Signs, for me, is an S tier. That's going to be a controversial take, but I think Signs is an S tier. And then also, if you don't believe me on, if you want to appeal to authority, I guess, Chris Stuckman also thinks it's a great movie. So does Roger Ebert, who are some, more well-known film critics. So I feel like there is a hidden genius to this movie that deserves to be analyzed. But next up, we've got The Sixth Sense, also directed by Shyamalan. I saw Signs before I saw Sixth Sense. I also saw The Village before I saw Sixth Sense. And I saw Old before I saw Sixth Sense. So I was kind of late to watching Sixth Sense, but when I watched it, the problem was I knew that Shyamalan likes twists. So 30 minutes into the movie, a key line is dropped, and I figured out immediately what the twist was. So the twist wasn't as remarkable for me as it was for other people who were watching Shyamalan for the first time, and they didn't understand. They didn't know that this guy liked twists so much, especially because this was kind of his first breakthrough movie. But the thing is, after rewatching it, I feel like this movie is not as intricate as some of his other movies. I feel like The Sixth Sense is really good, but I think that it's carried by the ending, and I feel like once you look past the ending, the movie is kind of like a paranormal Good Will Hunting, but it's not nearly as moving or powerful as Good Will Hunting. It's definitely got some aspects of it there because you got two characters of very different backgrounds learning from each other. But I feel like The Sixth Sense is better looked at as kind of like a character study than a horror movie. But I think it's very, very solid. I think it's very good. You could argue that it's S tier. Personally, I'm going to give it I think it's an A+. I think it's a very good movie. And I really liked it, but I feel like once the ending is, once you look past the ending and you rewatch the movie with the ending in mind, then the movie is not as powerful without it. So, and I feel like, in general, you can have some movies that have twists, but they can still be very powerful without them. But, let's move on to Jeepers Creepers. Jeepers Creepers is a fun movie. I think it is, it's a fun movie. It's also playing off of you're on a road trip and then you think about what if, if your car broke down or you're looking out into the, the woods, and you're thinking about, what kind of, horror would take place there. This kind of encapsulates that. So Jeepers Creepers for me is, it's a solid movie. I think the ending, I really like the ending actually. It's a really fun creature feature. And, I'm gonna give it a B tier. I think it's solid. Next up, we've got MidSummer. MidSummer, I think, is a good movie. I think that this is a movie that you can rewatch and pick up on more stuff as I've done. There's foreshadowing and whatnot. There's layers to this movie. I think Ari Aster is a very talented director. But this is completely and totally personal taste, guys. I just don't like it when movies use gore to scare you. I think if you have to use gore to scare me, then that's kind of... it's not as skillful as horror movies should be, in my opinion. And if you use gore, it should be in very select few areas. I feel like you shouldn't overdo it, and I feel like MidSummer kind of overdoes it with the gore, where that's kind of the spectacle of the movie. Now, I know people are going to defend MidSummer, say that's kind of the point. You want to get the shock factor, you want to show radicalization in people, and I understand that, but it's just personal taste, guys. I just don't like the gore, and I feel like there's some scenes where Ari Aster could have done without the gore, and I feel like he could have opted for a more suspenseful approach, but it's a very good movie. I'm going to give it an A tier. Next up, we've got The Ritual. I really like The Ritual. I think it's a fun movie. I don't think that it's as intricate as some of these other A-tier movies, but I think it's a very, very fun ride. I think it's a good movie. I think you'll have a lot of fun watching this movie. It's there's really no real weaknesses to it, but I don't think that the rewatchability is completely there because it's not as layered as some of these other movies. I'm going to give it a very solid B tier. Next up, we've got Train to Busan. I really like Train to Busan. I think Train to Busan is a great movie. I think that it's just as much of a zombie movie as it is a character study, and I really, really like that. I'm going to give Train to Busan an S tier. That might sound shocking because I kind of talked about it nonchalantly, but there's really no faults with this movie, and it does such a great job of examining the archetypes and drawing into, question what people are like during, extreme situations where you have to survive. And I really, really like that, and I feel like this movie does a great job with its pacing, and from a technical perspective, it's a great movie, and thematically, it has those elements. Although, I think it's a really, really solid movie. Maybe it's not as deep as, some of these other movies like Silence of the Lambs or Exorcist, but very, very solid movie. I can't think of any faults, and I think Train to Busan is a great movie that everyone should watch. It's an S tier for me. Next up, Hills Have Eyes. Hills Have Eyes is this is the 2006 version, by the way. I haven't seen the original. I want to watch it eventually. It is a slasher. It is not that... it's a slasher, and it's nothing really else, to be honest with you. I mean, it's just gore for the sake of gore. It is what it is. It's a C tier. Blair Witch Project. I really like this movie. This is similar to Texas Chainsaw Massacre. This movie was filmed on a very, very tight budget, and it solves a lot of the problems through itself. I've talked about this in my video, but basically... in my video over Blair Witch Project, I talk about how it's very efficient filmmaking, and also it solves problems through itself. So, for example, there is no soundtrack because they can't afford a composer, but it works within the movie because the movie's supposed to be a real life documentary, and it's recovered tapes from the woods. So obviously, there's not going to be a soundtrack. And there's some instances like this that you'll see throughout the movie, like the house that's used towards the end of the movie is a real life location that you could visit before it got demolished, but it was a public location that you could visit, and it wasn't something that was built exclusively for the movie. And I think the acting is actually really good in this movie. I know people should talk the acting, but I think the acting is good. I think it fits the kind of movie that you have here, and I think that's really solid, and I think it's really innovative. And I understand that it's not the first found footage horror movie that's Cannibal Holocaust, but I really, really like this movie. I think that from a budget perspective, it is kind of a marvel in itself, and I'm going to give it an A tier here. Next up, we have Hereditary. I really like Hereditary. I think Hereditary was super original. I think it's super, super layered. I really like Ari Aster as a director, as I mentioned before, and I think that he does a great job in this movie. And I think Toni Collette, her performance was criminally underrated. I think it's one of the biggest snubs that she didn't even get nominated for an Oscar because, that dinner scene, or I think it was dinner, that dinner scene was insane. And I feel like her acting in this movie was incredible, especially when you factor in that she's not even American. So the accent that she's putting on is, she learned that. It's not natural, right? So I think she's a fantastic actress. I think the movie itself is amazing, and I think it's a very rare thing for a horror movie to be better on the second watch, but Hereditary is because it's so layered and complex, and this movie reads completely different the second time versus the first time, and I love that. It's a genius movie. Easy S tier. Next up, Paranormal Activity. This was a movie that really could only be done once. I feel like the sequels are complete cop-outs, but I think the original one is pretty decent. I wouldn't say that I like it as much as Blair Witch Project, but I think that it's still a very solid movie. I think that it's got its niche of people who, if you like, found footage kind of stuff, then you're really going to enjoy Paranormal Activity. And I think the first one had a level of innovation to it that, the next ones don't have, because, at that point the trick's done. But it's still a very solid movie. I'm giving it a B tier. Coraline. I think Coraline is a very good movie. There's a lot of hidden depths to it. I had a video where I went over Coraline in depth, and that video took me like 10 hours to make. It was a video essay. And then the video got taken down because the people who manage Coraline's content on YouTube are complete dickheads. And it's funny because the movie is completely and totally free online on Tubi. Like, it's commercially free, right? But that's just kind of my spiel. I think the movie itself is great. I think that the elements to it are really good. You've got basically it's borrowing a lot from Abrahamic tales and whatnot because it's a story about temptation and childhood. It's got all of these aspects to it. You can go down a bunch of rabbit holes, a lot of hidden depth to Coraline, and this is a genius movie. It's an S tier in my opinion. Next up, you've got Get Out. Get Out is it's a very good movie. I think that Get Out is probably out of all the Peele movies, I think it's probably the best one. It's very, very clever. It's got, very, very good themes going for it, and it supports those themes really well. I'm not going to give away what those themes are in case you haven't seen it, but it's a very good movie and it's a must-watch for anyone who's into horror or even thrillers. I think Get Out is a fantastic movie, and I think that it plays out so well, and I feel like it's kind of similar to Train to Busan in that there's really no flaws with Get Out. Next up, we're going to talk about The Grudge. The Grudge, I like The Grudge, but the problem with it is, and this is the American version from I think 2003 or 2004, the issue with The Grudge is the fact that it doesn't take full advantage of its setting. And what I mean by that is you've got Americans in Japan who are dealing with a paranormal entity, and you can make a lot out of that. You could deal with them, not being heard by the general people, but it doesn't deal with, these outsiders, this whole idea of being an outsider at all. And I feel like it's criminally underutilized that you've got foreigners in Japan to the point where it feels like the movie being set in Japan is just for the sake of the aesthetic versus actually thematically adding something to the movie. I feel like all cursed movies are kind of the same. The Grudge, in my opinion, it's scary. But it's just, it doesn't take full advantage of its setting and its plot like it could, in my opinion. That's why it's a B tier. Next up, we've got the Mothman Prophecies. I really like the Mothman Prophecies. I think this is a movie that doesn't get talked about enough. This is a movie borrowed off of real-life phenomena, like the Mothman in Injured Cold, who is also known as the Grinning Man, if you've ever looked into urban legends. And, it borrows off of this real-life kind of stories, and it morphs it into this one cohesive plot. And I think it does a good job at that. I also kind of have also have a soft spot for Richard Gere, and I think her name is Laura Linney. I can't remember her name, but the girl from Truman Show and Ozark. I have a soft spot for her, and I think the Mothman Prophecies is a very, very solid movie. I think it kind of spells itself out a little bit too much, and that's my one gripe against it. But I think it's very unique. It's kind of more of a science fiction than a horror movie, but I think it's really interesting, and it deals with how a non-human entity would try to interact with humans, whether that's for good or bad. And I think it's a super fun and interesting movie. And watching this movie, I was never bored, and I think it's really, really interesting to watch, especially when you consider the fact that it's just so unique when you compare it to other movies, and it's more of a sci-fi than it is a horror movie, but it's definitely got some horror elements to it, and it's a very solid movie. It's an A tier for me. Also, criminally slept on. I feel like more people are going to talk about this movie, and there should be a bigger support for this movie. Next up, we've got House of a Thousand Corpses. House of a Thousand Corpses, similar to I Know What You Did Last Summer, is 100% a guilty pleasure movie. This is a movie that embodies all of the 2000s tropes, and I feel like it's kind of this weird string of ideas, and it's got, I think Rob Zombie made this movie, and it's got, Rob Zombie written all over it. It's a very peculiar movie, and it's 100% a guilty pleasure movie. I'm going to give it a C tier. Next up, we have Us. This is going to be a hot take, but I don't really like Us. I know that Us is usually a very polarizing movie. I know that you either love it or you hate it. I think that way too much of it is predicated on the ending, which I like the ending, but I feel like the rest of the movie, I feel like the pacing in the beginning is a little bit too slow for me, and I feel like they could have done a little bit more to string us along in the plot to make it more cohesive. But I think it's a very solid movie, and I'll be honest with you, I need to rewatch Us because I've only seen it twice, and I think that it's a layered movie, and I watched it years ago, so I'm kind of forgetting, but I remember I wasn't really that blown away by either my first viewing or my second viewing, and I feel like Us could be, I feel like it could have been better, but I'm going to rewatch this movie definitely in the future, so if I make a second version of this, who knows, it might be an A tier. I know people are going to argue with me, they're going to say that Us is better than, being a B tier, but for me, it's a B tier for now. I think it's a very good movie. I feel like thematically it has everything going for it. I know that Peele likes to have a lot of themes in his movies, but I just think that in terms of executing the plot and giving us events, giving us the right amount of events to keep us invested, doesn't do the best job at that. Next up, we've got Nope. I love Nope. I think Nope is easily my favorite Peele movie. And I say Get Out is the best Peele movie, but I think Nope is my personal favorite. I think it's the most entertaining movie, and I feel like it's the most unique movie out of all of his movies. Nope is, I love this movie because it takes some risks, but also it's got that thematic element to it that I really, really like. It's a very creative movie. But my one issue with it, after watching this movie a few times, is just that I've watched it twice in the theater now, and I've went through and I've read over it again. I've looked at crucial scenes and whatnot. I need to rewatch it again, I think, just to really come to a conclusion on this. But I feel like the ending was not as powerful as the rest of the movie, and I feel like that's my only real gripe with the movie. The rest of the movie was really, really strong, but I feel like the ending was not as... It wasn't as, brave or ambitious as the rest of the movie, and I feel like it kind of, for me at least, it sticks out a little bit, that it's not as ambitious, and also I feel like the end kind of drags a little bit. They kind of drag out the sequence a little bit more than they should have, maybe, where when you rewatch this movie, it feels like it's a little too long, but I think it's a very good movie. I really, really like Nope. You could argue for an S. For me, it's an A tier. Very, very good movie. I think Peele is a very talented director, and I feel like even with us being a B tier, the fact that this guy's made 3 movies only, and they're all just complete bangers, he's an exceptional director. Next up, we've got The Ring. The Ring is a very good movie in my opinion. I think The Ring is kind of this investigative detective movie for the first half of it, and then it kind of divulges into a horror movie. The one issue I have with it is that the twist that this movie tries to have, not in the exact ending scene, but the build-up towards the end, was not as moving for me as it was for some other people, because it's basically like a wordplay, and if you know what I'm talking about, they know what I'm talking about. It's basically a play on words where they try to make the audience intend something, they try to make the audience interpret a statement a certain way, but then they reveal that it's actually very literal, and for me, I originally interpreted it the way that it was supposed to be meant as a twist, so I wasn't blindsided by the twist like a lot of people were, and I feel like The Ring is, it's just the ending of it, that twist was not as remarkable as it could have been in my opinion, but I still think it's a very, very solid movie. It's got some tropes to it. I feel like the kid is way too edgy in the movie. I feel like him being so edgy doesn't really add a whole lot to the movie, but The Ring is very good. I think Naomi Watts does a very good job of giving us this, her character, and I feel like the performances are good overall. Really, really like The Ring. The movie helped bring about the end of slashers, and it ushered in a new wave of horror movies for the 2000s and 2010s. But The Ring is a very good movie. Definitely my favorite Curse movie. Next up, we've got The Others. The Others is a good movie, but I think that it's a bit slow. But, it's a movie that's very hinged upon its ending, and I think that it delivers. I think that this movie is very unique. I think it's good. I think the performances are good. You got Nicole Kidman, and in general, the movie's good. I feel like they could have done a few more scenarios to really make use of the setting, but very solid movie. I just wish that, the pacing in the beginning was a little bit better. I feel like they could have done things a little bit quicker in the beginning, but I think it's a very, very good movie, and I really, really liked it. So I'm going to give The Others an A. And then next up, we've got Jeepers Creepers 2. Jeepers Creepers 2, it's a C tier. I mean, it's a typical kind of slasher action movie kind of sort of. It's weird because it becomes an action movie when Jeepers Creepers 1 was definitely a lot more on the horror side. And then Jeepers Creepers 2 is just like you got a monster and then you've got this whole action shebang that happens. I think it's a fun movie. I'm not going to say that it's not a fun movie. It's 100% a fun movie. I really enjoyed my time with the movie. But when you look at it, in terms of, the themes and whatnot, I feel like it's definitely not on the same level as some other movies that we've talked about so far. So Jeepers Creepers 2, I'm going to give a C tier. I think it's a fun movie. If you watch Jeepers Creepers 1, you enjoy that, then you should definitely watch this. It's it's entertaining, but it's another guilty pleasure movie in my opinion. Next up, we've got Poltergeist, which is directed by Toby Hooper, but the movie itself feels like it's a lot more from Spielberg than it is from Hooper, and that's probably because it's written by him, and also because there's some circulating information online that Spielberg was more involved with the making of this movie than Hooper was. But Poltergeist, I really, really like this movie. I like that it shamelessly shows that it's the monster. Whenever you see, the ghost, most of the time in ghost movies, the ghost only reveals itself to one person. But in this, the ghost doesn't give a shit. The ghosts in this movie, they come out, they show themselves to everyone, they don't care. And I really, really like that the movie is so brave about it, and it's so, it's willing to take some risks, and I really, really like that about Poltergeist. It's a classic. It's a family movie, I feel like, but it's very, very good. If you watch it now, you can definitely tell it's got that I think it was 80s. Feel to it. Very, very good movie. I would give it an A tier. And it's also got some hidden depth to it. You know, it deals a lot with spirituality and dealing with, you know, life and death, and, you know, family. But the one issue that I have with it is just that I feel like when they were describing this alternate dimension with these ghostly beings, they could have done a better job of explaining it, and that is my only gripe. That's the only thing I didn't like. And for me, it did tend to drag a little bit towards the end, towards that second half. But very solid movie. Poltergeist is an A tier. It's a classic. Everyone needs to watch it. Next up, we've got The Village. So The Village is made by M. Night Shyamalan. It is The Village is a very good movie, but the problem with it is just that I feel like the sequence in which it does its reveals is really, really poor because it gets rid of the tension in a lot of scenes. And had the reveals been done in proper moments, then I feel like this movie would be a lot scarier. The tension would be a lot better. And The Village for me is a B tier. Very solid movie. I mean, I think that you should watch it. I just think that, you know, the reveals weren't done properly. I wish someone was in the room with Shyamalan while he was writing the script, and they told him, you know, hey, do this scene after this scene and not before it, because otherwise you're getting rid of all the tension, because that happens a lot. And so, you know, had The Village, you know, been, I feel like if The Village ironed itself out and they put the reveals in the right areas, it very easily could have been an A tier or even an S tier, because I feel like the plot itself is very good. It's just that, you know, the reveals were not in the right time. Next up, we've got Scream, which is a classic. Everyone likes Scream. It's a really good parody of the slasher genre. It plays off of scary movies themselves, and I really, really like that. It's kind of a teen slasher, but it's also making fun of itself, and it doesn't take itself too seriously, which I really, really like. I'm going to give Scream an A. Next up, we've got The Invisible Man. The Invisible Man I really, really liked. I think that it's a very good movie. There's a lot of tension. There's a lot of, pressure when you're watching this movie. I also really, really like that there's a lot of suspense. You know, when you look at things, you don't know if there's someone standing there, or if it's just, someone's imagination. But very, very good movie. The only thing I wish they kind of did a little bit better maybe was, I feel like the Invisible Man himself in this movie was a bit overpowered. Like, he came off kind of as like Iron Man a little bit, but very, very good movie. I really, really liked it. I'm giving Invisible Man an A. I think it's a very original movie, especially nowadays. I feel like a lot of the sequences in it were original, and they're very clever, and I really, really like that. Next up, we've got Old. Old I really, really liked. I think it's original. Okay, I didn't really like this movie. I thought it was decent. But the issue with it is that the first half was pretty bad. Like, the dialogue was horrible. And the fact that you've got foreign actors who are saying the dialogue just pronounces it so much more that it's horribly written dialogue. And I'm not against foreign actors, I love foreign actors, but the problem is that, you know, if they're reading bad lines, it's more obvious than if a normal native person does it. Especially, you know, if you've got a Hollywood, an American movie. But I think the second half of it was a lot better, and it's a really good body horror. I like Old, but I think the concept is cool, but, just the first half was, in my opinion, it was just so poorly written. I'm going to give it a B tier. The dialogue is just terrible for that first half, but it's a good movie. I think that you should watch, especially if you like Shyamalan stuff. Next up, we've got Jacob's Ladder. I like Jacob's Ladder. Jacob's Ladder inspired a lot of, inspired a lot of movies today and a lot of franchises today. I love Silent Hill. Silent Hill was indirectly inspired from Jacob's Ladder. I think Jacob's Ladder deals a lot with it deals well with the themes that it has. I think in the beginning, when there's a lot of mystery, there is it feels a bit slow, but I think that it's a very good movie. I like the end of it. I think this movie is really, really good, and I feel like it's got some theological issues in it, which I really, really like, and I'm going to give Jacob's Ladder an A tier. A very solid movie. I think everyone should watch the movie, and I feel like it's kind of underrated. Next up, we've got Oculus. Oculus, it's a low-budget movie. I liked it, but I feel like the movie tends to do a lot of flashbacks, where it goes from modern time to the previous timeline. And I think the modern timeline is just way more interesting than the previous timeline. I feel like they do way too many flashbacks, where I feel like the balance should have been leaning more towards the modern timeline. Also, Oculus is it's a good movie, but the ending is very predictable. I feel like it invests you, but the ending is just way too predictable. So Oculus, I'm gonna give a C tier. It's good, but it's just predictable, and then also it does too many flashbacks. Next up, we've got Alien. This should be pretty obvious. Alien's an S tier. I really like this movie. I think it's really good. I really like that it plays off of certain ideas, like Ripley being a female in this group of males, and she obviously isn't taken seriously. And then also, it's not predictable. I feel like you look at this movie and think to yourself, I can tell what's going to happen from a mile away, but you honestly can't. And I feel like the story of it takes some really good turns, and I really like that Alien is original, and it's also makes full use of its unique setting. And the fact that it's so unique, I really give it a lot of credit for, and I feel like it's a very good movie that's, obviously it's got all the praise to back it up. And that praise is there for a reason. Next up, we've got The Shining. The Shining is an S tier. I mean, I think you could see that coming. It's a very good movie. Kubrick is a genius. But, I mean, if you look into it further, obviously, there's some controversy. Kubrick was a dickhead when it came to treating his actors properly in general. And the ending is... The book version is a lot different than the movie. And personally, I always preferred the book to the movie. But I still think the movie is a very solid film. I think there's a lot of depth to analyze. I feel like there's a lot of careful attention to detail. And that's kind of true with all Kubrick movies. But it's a very good movie, even if it diverges from the book. And I understand that, Stephen King doesn't like it, but I think it's still a very good movie, and I feel like you have to give credit where it's due, and that, Shining is a very good and very influential horror movie. Next up, we've got The Cube. The Cube is a low-budget horror movie that's kind of like an indie horror movie, but I really like The Cube. I feel like it makes the most out of its setting, and I feel like it's really similar to 12 Angry Men in that it's all kind of encapsulated in one setting, but it makes the most out of it. When the sequels came, they kind of undid it because they tried to unravel the mystery for you, but the whole appeal of The Cube is that you kind of interpret The Cube as however you want to, and there's also, some themes prevalent in the movie that I really liked. And I told you guys before, I have a soft spot for low-budget horror movies that are creative and innovative, and I'm going to give The Cube an A. Next up, we've got Bird Box. Bird Box, similar to Oculus, I feel like, you've got different timelines and there's constant flashbacks. I prefer the current timeline a lot more than looking at the past. Bird Box is good. I mean, the scenario is completely and totally not in your favor. You are screwed. There is no way to survive this. But Bird Box is a decent movie. It's fun. It's entertaining. But it's just I feel like it overdoes it with the flashbacks to the point where the movie feels slow in certain points. I'm gonna give it a B. Next up, we've got the Descent. I really like The Descent. I think it's a very good movie. Personally, I would give The Descent a A. I think it plays off of some of the genre quirks really well, and it gives something kind of unique and new. I will say, if you watch this movie, make sure you watch it during the nighttime. I made the mistake of watching The Descent during the day, and I couldn't see anything because the movie is so dark. So make sure you're in a closed-off room, or that it's nighttime, so you can visibly see everything that's going on. It's very unique, and I really like that. Next up, we've got Cabin in the Woods. I really like Cabin in the Woods. I think Cabin in the Woods is kind of underrated. I feel like it's a very good horror satire, and eventually I want to make a video where I talk about the Cabin in the Woods in further depth. But it uses the archetypes and whatnot and subverts the genre in a very clever way, and it's so unique, and I love that. I love that so much about this movie. I'm personally gonna have to give it an S tier just because it's such a clever satire that I feel like it deserves that praise. We've got some repeats here. I'm sorry, guys. When I was copying over some of the images, I accidentally put them twice, and Tier Maker doesn't let you remove images, so unfortunately we've got some duplicates, so sorry for the eyesores. But next up, we've got Lights Out. Lights Out is a movie that's more famous for the scenes than the actual movie itself. And I think there's a short version of this movie. There's a short film before the real movie, before the full feature-length movie on YouTube. I like the short film a lot more. But the full feature-length movie is not bad. I think that it's very dependent on jump scares. It's a very typical horror movie. You can see everything coming from a mile away. But it's entertaining. I feel like you can watch it with your friends and you'll have a good time. Watch it with your friends, at midnight or when it's 2 a.m. like I did, and you'll have a fun time. But it's not like intricate or anything. It's got jump scares. It's a run of the mill kind of horror movie. The short film was better. I'm giving it a C. Repeat. Sorry. All right. Next up, we've got Smile. Smile I liked. I think that Smile is a very it's a good movie, but the issue with it is that it's so dependent on jump scares. Like, that's the only way that it really scares you, is by jump scaring you. And that was my issue with it, was that it's just way too dependent on it. And I feel like the movie really had something going, and I feel like they were just way too reliant on jump scares. It's similar to The Ring, in my opinion. In my opinion, it's an inferior version. It's not as good as The Ring, but it's very similar to The Ring. It's kind of got this detective side to it. I'm going to give Smile a B. And like I said before, all cursed movies are the same, and I still think that applies here. Next up, we've got It. It is a very... I'm talking about the newer version, Chapter 1. It's a good movie. I feel like it plays it pretty safe. Nothing too remarkable. It's a good movie. There's no faults with it, but that's because it takes no risks. I'm gonna give it a B tier. I think it's a very good movie. It's fun. It's a fun ride. What else is there to say? Next up, we've got The Host. Now, The Host is directed by Bong Joon-ho. Bong Joon-ho directed Memories of Murder. He directed Parasite, Snowpiercer, Mother, Okja. He's a very, very accomplished director. And The Host is, in my opinion, a very solid movie. I really like the color palette of this movie. I feel like it really... it has its themes that it deals with. It has its message. And I really, really like that about Bong Joon-ho movies in general, that they're very thematic. I'm going to give this movie an A tier. I think the cinematography is fantastic. I love that there is a scene in the beginning with this monster kind of being really quiet and still, and eventually it breaks out and all hell breaks loose. And I really love this long scene of just the monster wreaking havoc. I love this scene. So I love The Host. I think that it's got some really, really good cinematography to it, and it's a very, very solid movie. Definitely one of Bong Joon-ho's weaker movies, but a very, very good movie nonetheless. And, that speaks to his directing ability, for that's one of his weaker movies. Next up, we've got The Purge. The Purge is a good movie. It's unique. Not really that unique, though, but it was new at the time. It had too many spin-offs. It became a cash grab like everything else in the 2010s. But The Purge, my issue with it was just the ending. I feel like the ending was really, really stupid. But it's a good movie. It's not horrible. I think that it's a fun ride. Next up, we got Doctor Sleep, which is the sequel to The Shining. I think Doctor Sleep as a movie was more of an action movie than a horror movie. I think it's fun. I think it's entertaining. I feel like it's a nice send-off for for the aftermath of The Shining, but it's not like it's not remarkable in any way. I feel like it's just a very solid movie that's it's decent. Like, I don't really have any complaints, but it's nothing remarkable. It doesn't really have that attention to detail that The Shining has. It doesn't really have anything that's the X factor, right, that draws you to this movie. So I'm gonna give Doctor Sleep a B tier. Next up, we got I Am Legend. I Am Legend is, I think the book is a lot better still. I think the adaptation is good, but, considering that it's an adaptation, I feel like they could have done a better job. It's a good movie, but I just wish that they stuck a little bit more to the book. It's a good movie, but in my opinion, considering that it's based off the book, I feel like they could have done a better job because they already had a guideline, they already had, a layout, and it wasn't like they were doing everything from scratch. But a good movie. I'm going to give it a B tier. It's a very, very fun watch, but I like the book more. Next up, we've got The Boy. I actually think The Boy is it gets too much shit. I feel like The Boy is a good movie. I think it's really, really fun. I think it's a decent movie. I feel like once you get past the first watch, there's not a whole lot of rewatchability to it, but I still think that it's a fun movie. I think it got some really, really nice scenes to it. There's some really, really good, tension-filled scenes. So personally, I'm gonna give The Boy a B. B for The Boy. It's a decent movie, and I would say it's better than these C tier movies. Personally, I think it's not as clumsy as some of these movies. Next up, we've got Scream 2. I'll be honest with you, I do not think Scream needed a sequel. I think Scream 2 is, I know a lot of people love this movie, but personally for me, it's too long for what it is. And I feel like it was unnecessary. I don't really like it that much. I feel like Scream 1 was a lot better. I feel like Scream 1 just does everything better. And Scream 2 is a B tier in my opinion. It's a decent movie, but it's not as, it's nowhere near the first in my opinion. Next up, we've got Creep. Now, Creep is definitely a very acquired taste movie. You're either going to love this movie or you're going to hate this movie. Personally, I think I can see both sides. If you're either going to find it creepy and unsettling, or you're going to think it's stupid. And personally, I think it's creepy. I think it's unique. I think that it puts a nice little spin on found footage. So, considering that it does that, unique take on the found footage horror genre, I'm going to give it a B tier. Definitely an acquired taste. Some people might have it as in their S's or A's, but I'm giving it a very solid B tier. Next up, we've got A Quiet Place. I don't think you can see that, but A Quiet Place, I think, was a very good movie. You got John Krasinski, Jim from The Office. And I think that it's, a really good movie. It's got some really, really good suspenseful sequences. And there's some scenes in here where, where you're hooked. And I really, really like that. And it's a very, very good movie. In general, there's really no complaints with this movie. Maybe it could have been a little bit deeper, but I think it's very, very good. When you're into this movie, you're into this movie, and it sinks you in. I really, really like that. So I'm going to give it a very solid B tier. Next up, we've got World War Z. World War Z is a good movie. Brad Pitt, sometimes he'll pick very unique scripts like he did with Bullet Train and Curious Case of Benjamin Button. But World War Z puts a twist on the zombie genre, but it's nothing extreme. But it's a good movie. It's not a bad movie by any means. I'm going to put it in B tier. And just before we go on, looking back at it, you can, for A Quiet Place, you could argue it's A tier, and you could push me for it, and I would probably agree with you. It's just that it's lacking some of that deeper meaning to it for me, because I feel like it's really about family, but that's kind of about it, and I feel like it doesn't really go super deep in some themes as it could. So A Quiet Place B tier is not a bad score at all. It's not a bad tier by any means. I think it's very good, but you definitely could argue for an A tier. And for each of us, we've got different tastes. I just wish that it was a little bit deeper, but very solid movie. But anyways, moving on, we've got The Strangers. The Strangers is it's kind of a slow, methodical horror movie. I think that it does a great job of being giving this desolate, helpless kind of horror. And I really, really liked it, but I really, really liked the first third of the first act of the movie, and the rest of it I felt like was really, really weak. And the movie is purposeless for the sake of being purposeless, which I hate. I hate that, guys. And it's not just that I don't get it or whatever, I don't jive with the movie. The reason why I hate that is because I feel like they could have done other narrative things to add some kind of moral to the story, The fact that the movie is just nihilistic for the sake of being nihilistic, I feel like is kind of, it's not as developed as it could be. I feel like the movie it could go down that route if it wants to, but it also could add other things to give us some other substance to examine in the movie. So The Strangers, I'm going to give a C. Next up, this is our last movie actually, we've got Sleepy Hollow. So Sleepy Hollow, Tim Burton, it was, it's not, this is again a movie that I don't really think is it's not really a horror movie per se, but I think that, because it's, we're in the fall season and it's got that campy feel to it. It also takes heavily from expressionist films like Nosferatu. I feel like it's worth talking about. I feel like it's a very, very solid movie. I just wish that, I feel like it kind of plays out as like a drama or like a crime drama in some sense. There's some, investigative elements to it. I wish they explained some parts better, but I really, really liked Sleepy Hollow. I think it's a really, really beautiful movie to look at, very expressionist, and you can see the influence, but it's a very, very good movie. I'm going to give it a B tier. I think it's very, very solid. And, looking over my tier list, there's a few movies where I feel like you can interchange, but, I think this is a good starting point. Eventually, I do want to come back to this maybe next year and incorporate some more foreign horror movies, as well as, you know, some other movies that I missed because I didn't get to watch everything. And sorry for these repeats, by the way. I know they're kind of an eyesore. But what I wanted to say, guys, was that I'm sorry that I got this video out kind of late. I've been busy with school. And also, this month of October, I went through and I watched around 20 horror movies because I had seen a lot of the iconic scenes, but I hadn't actually seen the movies in their entirety for a lot of these movies. So I went through, I rewatched a bunch of them. So this movie is kind of low effort compared to my other videos where I'm usually have a lot more editing going on. But this movie took a long time to make, so, you know, if you want to support the video by leaving a like or, you know, commenting or whatnot, then, you know, that would mean a lot to me because this video took a long time to make because I had to watch 25 movies, and sometimes I was watching 3 movies a day for a week straight, and that was kind of crazy. I did that last week. Again, you know, please let me know your thoughts over some of these horror movies in the comments below. If I have anything that you disagree with, then please let me know. I'm open to discussion on these. I think that's really fun. I mean, all of us have different tastes. You know, obviously my tier list is never going to match yours. No two tier lists are going to be the same. Sorry guys, I told you I was going to stutter. But thank you so much for watching this video. Thank you for being patient with me, guys. And I know that Halloween is over, but I feel like horror movies are, you know, they're a year-round kind of thing. And we're in November, guys, so no nutting, guys, but stay strong. We're in this together, boys. Thank you so much for watching. I love you guys.